I want to talk today, if I may, about pressure, about leading under chaos, about when it's challenging. I think we probably all agree that we live in challenging times, globally, nationally, economically, probably even locally. A lot of what we would refer to as the Rumsfeldian's known unknowns. The question I've got for you today when we look at this is, how do you turn up and how does your team turn up when it gets challenging? Because really great leaders, they don't necessarily react, but they reset. They take a pregnant pause. They take a moment to understand what's going on around them before they actually react. And in today's session, I want to really just touch on leadership under chaos. The future and what it looks like. There's lots of change, lots of mitigating factors to the economy. You've got budgets to deal with. You've got global challenges and trends to deal with. You've got digitization. You've got artificial intelligence, and all of that brings with it. And it can feel quite overwhelming for a business owner, for a CEO, because ultimately, when you're in that position, leadership is quite lonely. It's a challenging place to be. So what does that look like? Let's explore how great leaders, and I'm going to share some of my own personal experiences from my military days. No doubt that, when I was serving, many occasions where, the operating environment was very high pressure. And how the good leaders, how the great leaders, inspired, motivated, gave sight and foresight to the team in order to lead through what for some and many would be chaos. To get started, let's explore what chaos or high pressure or pressure is, and what it isn't, and what it doesn't always look like is a disaster. The disasters are kind of the I guess the obvious piece, but actually, as a a business owner, as a director, as a CEO, often those moments of high pressure, perceived chaos, perceived challenges, there's an internal and external factor to that. Obviously, there are the external influences that are pressuring, in terms of your thoughts and your beliefs, but then there's the internal narrative. And it's kind of like, if you were to look at it right now, how would chaos look in your world today, this moment? What is causing pressure for you in your environment, your situation? And then ask yourself in terms of what are the external and internal influences that are driving the way that I'm reflecting and the way I'm reacting to that. As a leader, you can't control the storm. But what you can control is how you show up. You can start to control the feelings, the emotions. Now, it's not easy. And again, if I go back to my military days, a lot of what happened in the military and a lot of how we turned up in the military was only as a result of being trained in high pressure situations so that when pressure did strike and when the challenge was there and when chaos did turn up, you had some assimilation of knowledge. You had some idea of how to react, how to respond, how to reframe. And I'll touch on that in a bit. But what does it look like for you? What does your energy feel like when the pressure is on? And actually, when you think about it in terms of your behaviors and how you turn up, what message does that send? Both, if it's quite overt and loud and it's very clear to see how you're feeling, or even the nuances, the shaking of voice. Those have an impact on your team. It has an impact on the situation. The external and the internal influences are really key in how you start to, one, understand how you operate within pressure and high pressure situations, and two, the impact that you can have on the rest of your team. You'll have all seen kind of like the movies. The one that always makes me laugh is Aliens, when they land on the planet and one of the soldiers is having a proper meltdown. That has an impact on everybody else. And there's a reason why when these pressure situations come on, especially as a business owner, as a leader, as a CEO, you're not going to necessarily be the only one that feels that pressure. But guess who they're going to look to? They're going to look to you. So we find ourselves in a high pressure situation. And I think one of the key aspects is kind of like, how do we actually react to that? Now, from the military days, if I talk you through what we had as our contract drills, the contract drills were a set of instinctual reactions that would take moments in order to extract you from a dangerous situation, get you away from the dangerous situation so that you could do one thing really well, and that is to reset, to take account of what the situation is presenting you and how you then start to determine the best course of action. What is it you're going to do in that situation in order to overcome and counteract that external pressure, that chaos? That's the challenging bit. Now, in the military, we train all the time for those situations, but in business, very rarely. As a leader, what do you do with your team in order to determine whether or not, you can respond and act if a crisis happens? Now, I have a very simple approach with anybody that I'm working with, and it's kind of like what we would term as the 3R model. So the 3R model is recognize, regulate, reset. And by resetting, it's kind of reframing that situation. So recognize what's going on, the immediate action. What happens when something goes wrong? And it might be a financial issue, in which case we've got to freeze accounts. We've got to, make sure that we're informing the necessary, monetary organizations, banks, et cetera. We've got to, make sure we're getting everybody on the same page. We're regulating the response so everybody is informed, understand what's going on, and then we've got to reframe it. And by reframe it, it's kind of like really taking control so that you're not in a position where situation is driving your responses, but actually what you're able to do is to reframe in such a way that you can then drive the responses to the situation. You get and gain control. Recognize what's really happening. Understand, the difference between fact and feeling. Understand how to regulate, what can you do personally to control the way that you're feeling? Now, actually, this is where that internal piece comes in, because you can start to control your breathing. You can take a moment. You can look at steadying your tone, the pitch of your voice, the way in which you're presenting yourself right now. And that takes a moment just to get to that place. And then reframe that. What opportunity is there in terms of reframing this, looking at this from a different angle? There's a phrase that I often use, actually, and this might sound a little bit strange, but where's the gift and opportunity in this situation? Now, it might always be quite challenging to find that, but when you do, it actually helps you to navigate, to understand, to plan, come up with a strategy and an action to get through to the other side and actually to deal with it. One thing that I always talk about, and this is, when we start coming to the course of action side of life, is you start to look at, what's the very worst case scenario in this instance? And again, brainstorm that with the team. What's the best case scenario in this instance? And come up with what that looks like. But then in between those two, what you'll find is what you can live with. And when you define what that looks, that's going to present you with a course or a series of courses of actions that you can then start to apply, to act upon. So I think it's really important, that we remember how we turn up. So recognize it, recognize the situation, regulate yourself, and then reframe. Resetting yourself in order to actually deal with the challenge that you're facing. That is absolutely key, without shadow of a doubt. One of the things I do want to just touch on here, and again, this is something that you do learn through the military, but you learn it through a career. It's not learned overnight, and there isn't a necessarily quick fix to this. But it's the presence, the leadership presence, how you turn up, and having that ability to to turn up and remain calm. There's a great phrase out there in terms of how do you stay calm when everyone around you is losing their head. And that's why and when people look to leadership, that's why that people look to you for that direction, that support, that focus in terms of what are we going to do, in terms of actually how you deal with the situation. So calm leadership is deliberate. It's not emotionless. It's about being emotionally available. It's about, actually, it's an interesting one here because this is where emotional intelligence really comes in. And one of the key factors of emotional intelligence, EQ, is understanding how your emotions turn up and how to regulate them. You see, so many people out there don't have the ability to regulate their emotions. There's a lot of snap responses, snap judgment. There's a lot of, rashness and irrational thought. And that's because there's less ability to be aware and to regulate their own emotions on the back end of the situations that they're in. So suddenly when we start to look at this as a leader, is how do you start to regulate your emotions? And as I mentioned, it's kind of like you've got to slow down, nice and smooth approach to what it is you're doing. And remember, smooth is slow, but smooth is fast. Because when everyone around you is feeling the pressure, the fact that what you're able to do is to give them some insight, to offer them, a moment of clarity, to give them a direction and a route that we're going to take, to set an horizon in the future of what this is going to look like, how we're going to get through this. That starts to create that calming presence and having a positive impact. And it offers a moment of stability to the situation, which if you think about it in terms of chaos, and in terms of those high pressure moments, that is one of the things that is really, really important. So how do you prepare for the storm? How do you prepare for chaos, for resilience through crisis? What does that look like for you in terms of your business, your organization? Now, one of the biggest challenges often is a case of, we're busy doing business. We've got business to do. We've got to focus on delivery. We've got to focus on marketing, on sales. We've got to focus on things. Well, let me ask you how you start to focus when you know there's a budget coming. Let me know how you started to focus. Go back a few years when suddenly COVID hit. Now, the reality of all those things is it's kind of like, but it won't impact us. It's not going to have an impact on us. Yeah, it won't change anything we're doing. And yet those were and have been, monumental moments that absolutely did change what was going on. And then just think for a moment, the likelihood is that you hadn't prepared at all for it. And so when you look at it in that context, what do you do? How do you deal with it? And that's where preparation comes in. And this is one of the key aspects and one of the key learnings that I'll obviously share from my military day is train. Every quarter you should be doing a quarterly business structure, business strategy day, whatever that might look like. Certainly with my clients, we come together and we do a full day of planning. And within that planning, one of the things that I add to it is kind of like what I would term as the risk register. So what is on the horizon over the next 90 days that is at risk? Where are the challenges externally, internally to the business this is now? So what internal risks are in the business? That could be, people. It could be losing someone that is in a key position. Externally could be, the influences of the budget and other bits and pieces, what's going on economically, global strife, market presence. There's no shortage of what some of those things could look like. So when you start to answer that question, you can get a real handle on actually what do I need to do to be prepared for those situations. And so having a risk register at the very minimum is key. Now, if you identify a risk that's quite substantial, what could you do then? Well, then it's really about knowing how to deal with that one. And the only way to know how to deal with it is plan for it. Plan and then rehearse your response. Why not have an afternoon or a morning or a session where you test the team. You give them, a hypothetical situation that's just happened, and how do we deal with that? Now, it might sound that, well, yeah, that's all very well and good, but what if you had a risk register, and you had policies and procedures that were set in place to mitigate those risks, and then you decided to do a training session on just one of those, and it happened to be the impact of a global pandemic? What do we do? There is IT is a very good world for this, actually, because IT offer a lot of mitigation with regards to the breakdown of your IT infrastructure. Any good MSP will offer you the insight to what do you do in terms of your data backup? What are you going to do in a data breach? What's going to happen if you got a cyber attack? Yeah, that's the only area of business that we do it for. Go and have a look at your business now. Have a look at the situation now. What comes up on the risk register there? Who, as a client, is at risk? What happens if you lose one of your top 5 customers that happens to be 50% of your revenue? What happens if there is a financial challenge in the business? How much debt headroom do we have in the business? How long could we survive and actually make sure that we can keep going in order to counter that? You see, now when we're talking about this, what we're talking about is actually risk management. Now we're talking about actually putting process and procedure in place, having what we call in the military standard operating procedures. And it might be a procedure that you never have to use, and let's hope you don't. But if you've never planned for it, if you've never had a look at it, and you've got no idea what happens when it starts, so the training and the planning and the preparation for worst case scenarios is absolutely key. You need to have clarity on what matters most in those situations. What is it that we're going to have to focus on? We need to make sure that we're truly grounded as a team. There's a strong communication process in place. You need to make sure that you've got control of the situation. There needs to be, consistency in terms of how we're turning up to this, consistency in terms of how often we put training processes in. And I've just suggested that at least once a quarter, you focus on one challenge. And then resilience. Resilience, obviously, is that lead to recovery, so that you can remain focused and on track, on target. And you know what? Sometimes this is where culture and team comes into it, because you might need your team to go over and above and beyond what they would normally do. So remember, if I was to sum up what I'm talking about today, leaders don't just react. There is an instinctual reaction to it, but very quickly you put yourself into a situation where you respond. You reset and you gain clarity. You be the presence that calms the organization, that calms the team, that gives them structure, that gives them focus, that gives them inspiration, that motivates action, that gives clarity of thought. Remember that, calm, in the same way that pressure and losing your head is contagious, calm is contagious. Remaining, grounded, composure and communication, those things are absolutely key. At least once a quarter, train for, challenges, train for the risks that you can identify within your business. Have policies and procedures that are a step-by-step, response to a situation, so that you in those times of high pressure, you can create clarity of thought by just following a straightforward checklist, having that process and procedure in place. Have a risk register. So every quarter, review it. What and where are the risks within our business, externally, internally? And then make sure you've got mitigation for each of them. And guess what? That's where your training can come from. That's where your policies can come from. The bottom line here in leadership is the sense that just because you're the business owner or just because you're the CEO, that you're going to be the one that has the answers. You're going to be the one that's going to have a level head when, pressure strikes. We're all human. But for you as a business owner, for you as a CEO or managing director, then preparation is key. You know, it's one of the key factors that I work with any business owner, especially as their organization starts to grow and develop and they get, you know, bigger teams and more opportunities. You know, they've got to be able to actually develop that level of level-headedness in terms of actually they can approach the challenges. And the best way to do that is through awareness. How do I turn up? What are my reactions and responses? What do I do to ensure that the team can, you know, remain calm? How do I implement and influence that? Look, if any of this resonates with you, I would really, you know, value a share, a like, comment, jump in. Let me know what your thoughts are, what you're thinking, you know, what your reflection is on this, what your ideas are, what's worked for you, what hasn't. And remember, leadership without limits begins with emotional control. Have a great day.